Yes. First question, please.
Hi, I'm Frank from Dallas. This is for Dr. Joe. In your latest...
Volume. And also a little slower. It's good.
Frank from Dallas. This is for Dr. Joe. In your latest book and also today, you said that the mind is the brain in action. Science of mind seems to have correlation, evidence, anecdotes that a person that's in a coma, that they can be healed by practitioners using science of mind, spiritual mind treatments. So it would suggest that the mind came first before the brain. What's your opinion on that?
Okay, so if we look at definitions, the neuroscientific definition of mind is the brain in action. Mind is the brain at work. You have 100 billion neurons. They can fire in different sequences, different patterns, and different combinations. And the sequences and patterns of combinations produce different levels of mind. Now, in certain traditional texts, whether it's Buddhist texts or whether it's science of mind, they explain mind, and I use the word consciousness to explain mind in that sense. Now, consciousness is that immaterial essence, that energy that really is animating the brain. And so when consciousness moves through the brain, it produces mind. So then the brain is just an anatomical piece of material. And science says that you can literally rewire your brain, you can literally change its function, but who's doing the changing of the brain and the mind? And it's consciousness. Now, consciousness to me has two elements. Consciousness is awareness, awareness is paying attention. And so then there is a free-willed level of awareness called you and I, the journeymen, the journeywomen from source down to matter. And we got to this level and we didn't go any further because tiramisu is here, so we stopped. Chocolate, too. So then all of a sudden we drink the wine of forgetfulness and we have to journey back to source. And then as we journey back to that objective consciousness then is the consciousness of the field, observing all of this into reality. So then when your consciousness turns inward and it begins to interact with this greater consciousness, you can't enter as a somebody. You can't enter as your personality. You have to enter as a nobody. And the element of taking your attention off your body, off your identity, off of things, off of places, and off of time, leaves you as pure consciousness. So then now, all of a sudden, the brain starts moving back into orderliness because the operator's gone, and all of a sudden, you start getting that kind of synchronization that takes place called coherence. So then, as the autonomic nervous system, which is a self-organizing intelligence, begins to create order where there's disorder, all of a sudden, the upscaling of biology begins to change. So consciousness, the free-willed you and I, is animating a body to produce different levels of mind. That objective consciousness, which is the field, is what we interact with. And so it would be a good idea then, if all of your attention is on your environment, to close your eyes and disconnect from your environment. To sit your body down and no longer allow it to move and be greater than your body, and really give up your appointments and your thoughts about the past and the future and find the present moment. And if you are going to create something by thought alone, then you have to become thought alone. And you have to literally linger in that infinite field where all possibilities exist. And we've measured it enough times to see that when you truly do that, all of a sudden now, your brain and body begin to change as a result of it.
I'd like to add something to that. This field is so new that we're talking about. The discoveries that are being made so quickly that mainstream is not able to catch up with all the new discoveries. So we're still thinking about a mechanistic model, a mechanical brain. Consciousness is, science is still struggling with that. On the one hand, on the other hand, the discoveries are pushing us quantum understandings into the future. And one of the places where this is happening is new science, and this is peer-reviewed science. So this isn't theory or hypothesis or new thought. This is happening in peer-reviewed scientific research, is now suggesting that the memories that you and I have, and the question was about what's happening in the brain and the mind, that our memories do not reside within our brain, that our memories don't even reside within our bodies, that the memories reside in the field, and what we call the brain is our accumulation of antenna. You can think of them like that, of the antenna that we grow and create in our lifetime that tune to the place in the field where the information resides. Does that make any sense if I say it that way? So, I mean, this is so real. This is so real. And I did a pre-conference workshop. We touched on this a little bit on Wednesday. Some of you, I think, are in the room here. This is so real. My colleagues in Silicon Valley, that I left Silicon Valley, they're still working there. They are actually developing computer memory chips based upon a droplet of water that is a very refined droplet of water rather than silicon. And what they're finding is they can pump terabytes of information, entire city blocks of a library into this droplet of water. And they're saying, how in the world is the droplet absorbing all this? And then they figured out it's not. The droplet is creating a template, but the information is in a field that extends even beyond the chip, beyond the computer. This is the bridge to quantum understandings, quantum realities. So when we talk about influencing one another and our brains, what we're really talking about is our brain through the act, and I mentioned this yesterday, remember those of you who were with me yesterday, the act of choosing to learn something differently and how we grow the neurites on the neurons. Okay, those are the antenna. When we do that, those are the antenna that are tuning to the place in the field that holds the memories, or it holds the language that we're trying to learn, or the mathematic understandings. We are resonators tuning to the field, and that changes everything. When you think about science of mind and why it works the way it works, when you think about remote healing, when you think about entanglement, remote viewing, all of those things, it puts a whole new spin on all of that. So I just wanted to we'll probably build on this as we go through this conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon. In regards to short and also long-term memory, if you're developing memories based on some accumulated study, what is the difference between simple recall and developing the ability to reach in and interact, such as playing music from memory? In other words, you can study the notes, you can study the information, but to be able to take that information and actually manipulate it, utilize it, think about it, expound on it. So if you're trying to play a musical instrument and all you can do is versus playing it automatically, playing it smoothly. So you'd be pulling memories back. What's the difference in the neural connections between rote memory and being able to manipulate memory with thoughts and ideas, new ideas?
Okay. So I'll take a shot at it. So you have basically two types of memory systems biologically. One is called declarative memories, and the other is called non-declarative memories. And declarative memories are memories that you can declare. And for once, science made it simple. They're also called explicit memories. They're the autobiographical self. And those particular memories come from semantics, things you learn intellectually, like phone numbers and facts. And then what's called episodic memories, things that you learn from experiences in your life. And so when you meet somebody for the first time, you talk about where you're from, where you live, the things you own, what you studied, who you know. And that kind of declaration is all about conscious awareness, and it's about, for the most part, the autobiographical self. But if you keep repeating something over and over again, as you've heard from the three of us in different ways, you begin to develop what's called non-declarative memories. And non-declarative memories are memories that you can't declare. In other words, you've done it so many times, you don't even know how you do it. And when you get to that level of expertise, you have refined and enriched neurological networks that are pretty much automatic programs. So then as you begin to develop non-declarative memories, this is the home of our habits, our skills, our emotions, our emotional reactions, and it's what's called implicit memories because they're pretty much functioning from the subconscious. Does that make sense? So then when you learn a skill, whatever it is, like music, and you reach a certain point where you get to a level of competence that you stop thinking. And that zone, that place where you're getting feedback from the sound and your ability to be able to improvise in the same moment allows you to get into that creative space. But for the most part, most people have to go through those steps from thinking to doing to being. And it's going from the explicit memory system to the implicit memory system, and that's the non-declarative system, where all of a sudden it becomes automatic. And great athletes, great musicians, great cooks, whatever it is, they've developed it they've done it so many times that all of a sudden it's become subconscious. And the beauty behind it is they start trusting their intuition. And when they start trusting the feeling and start trusting the intuition, they're able to improvise and they're able to create, and all of a sudden they step outside the boundaries of the known into that unknown place. And if you do something for 20 or 30 years, you know, and you know that you know. And when you know that you know, I call that enlightenment. And when you know that you know something, no one can take it away from you, and it's now grounded, it's innate in you. So that's a little bit about those two.
Yes, please.
So my question is about the coherence. You're talking about the coherence in the brain, and a lot of us work with the heart math folks that look at coherence of the heart. So my question is, how are those related? Are they connected? Is it a cause and effect, or?
When you're talking about the heart and the brain, you're actually talking about coherence between the heart and the brain. Coherence, by definition, implies a relationship between two things. And heart math is talking about heart-brain coherence. That's exactly what they're doing. So we always have some level of coherence between the heart and the brain. And what heart math has done is developed refined techniques that help us to optimize that coherence, to raise that level of coherence. But it's every moment of every day, there's a conversation between your heart and your brain. It's happening right now. To the greater extent, your heart is speaking to your brain. To a lesser extent, your brain is communicating back to your heart through the vagus and the spinal cord, the nervous systems. And it's the quality of that conversation that determines the coherence that you're talking about between the heart and the brain. So when we are placing our emotion, or our focus, our awareness in our heart, okay, and then you begin, one of the techniques is to have a feeling of care, gratitude, compassion, appreciation. Those are the four under laboratory conditions that work really well. That's the key. When you begin to have the feeling, that's engaging your heart and your brain together, because often you're recalling an experience or a memory of compassion or appreciation or something, your children, your spiritual mentor, your cat, your dog. So you are using the heart and the brain, and it's all about this relationship, the coherence between the heart and the brain. So that's a long answer to a short question. The short answer is yes, they are related.
So heart rate variability is a measurement of this.
No, HRV, heart rate variability, is beat to beat.
Right.
When we first come into this world as young people, we have a tremendous heart rate variability. That means the time between one beat and the next varies with every heartbeat, and it gives us that variance. That's called heart rate variability. That gives us the ability to respond quickly to the new world that we've just come into, to know if the stovetop is a hot burner or if that's a friendly dog or not. And as we age, not for people in this room probably, but typically what they say is we become set in our ways, is the term. And being set in our ways is reflected in the heart rate variability. It becomes more regular. We lose heart rate variability, so change becomes hard. And by initiating this conversation and optimizing that conversation, you rebuild your heart rate variability like you were when you were a kid again. You can do it in a heartbeat, just like that. So, long answer, short question. Yeah. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to offer another, an addition to what we just talked about, and that is, remember we talked about the brain having electrical activity, it's like a tuning fork. And what's interesting about it is that the amplitude, the power of that is not that great. Brain amplitude is relatively small compared to the power generated by the heart. What's the significance to me is for example, is that When you don't have them in coherence, your thoughts are going to be broadcast, but they're not going to go very far. But when you bring your heart and your mind together, the heart is a carrier wave. It is much more powerful and therefore carries the signal from your brain out into the world and has much more impact than if you just keep it in your head and then try to broadcast with your head alone. So when you bring the two together in harmony, you're really influencing a greater field around you with your intentions.
Yeah, we've seen this in our research in studying people doing this, because we see that you can't have brain coherence without heart coherence. In the sense, you can't have heart coherence without brain coherence. And it's almost like consciousness is sitting in the autonomic nervous system. So the key of doing all of this is to be able to sustain a specific state. So if most of your daily life is reacting to people and things and places, then most of your energy is going to vacate this center, and you are going to return back to very predictable ways. So we want it to become a skill for people so they can say, oh my gosh, I'm a little bit fearful now, I'm a little bit frustrated. Let me take a moment and see if I can regulate and change my internal state. They have to find the present moment to do that. They have to break the stress response. They have to change their breathing. Brain waves slow down. Consciousness is falling in the limbic brain. At the same time, the heart is moving back into coherence. And now they're broadcasting a very significant coherent field. That kind of orderliness can be turned into a skill. And so then eyes open, eyes closed. It's just a function of your ability to regulate internal states.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Kat from Hawaii. So it's kind of a three-part question. Obviously, PTSD is in a very incoherent state, right? And then on the other wave, and you didn't really talk about the gamma waves, but that's been found with people who've meditated for a very long time. So part of my question is, the people that were up there that were going through transformation, was that gamma state, that all the wild swings? And then if PTSD, and I'm just now figuring out it's not within the body, and there is that incoherence, where is the field of that energy, that very wild, scattered energy, where's the how? We probably haven't figured out the how, but
The how? Is that what you
the
said?
how does it get there? I mean, it's like you go through an experience, and for the longest time, and I'm a psychologist, so the longest time I didn't believe in PTSD until I went through an earthquake. And for no reason, out of nowhere, for many years later, an experience would come up, or I'd have body work done, and it would come out. So I've thought it's within the body. So I'm very, very intrigued about this field and how to work within the field. Obviously, I meditate a lot as well, and we've talked a little bit. So I've got a complex question that's kind of bigger than I started out with.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, let's see if we could break it down. So when people experience significant trauma or shock, what happens is the experience captures all of the brain's attention. There's a change in your internal state, it's horrifying, and you put all of your attention on that experience in your outer world. And it's that particular association that starts the process. Now, from a survival standpoint, you could have 10 things that happen really good to you in one day, and one bad thing that happens to you, and you will focus on that one bad thing. How many people know that? And the reason being is because the survival gene says, get ready in case it happens again. So we tend to try to anticipate the future based on our experiences in the past. And we, out of the infinite potentials that exist in the quantum field, we'll select the worst case scenario. And we'll prepare ourselves for that event, because if the worst thing happens, we have better chances of survival if anything less occurs. Does that make sense? So that what people then do then is they have a traumatic event and they replay the event over and over again in their brain. And as they keep recalling the event and they keep reviewing it, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was occurring. And the body is the unconscious mind. It doesn't know the difference between the actual experience in their life that creates the emotion and the emotion that they're fabricating by thought alone. To the body, it's exactly the same. So the body is re-experiencing the event over and over again, and it's the redundancy of that cycle that begins to condition the body as well as the brain to live in the past, because now the trauma is existing in that implicit memory system that we just talked about. And all the talk therapy, all the counseling, all of that stuff is not going to change it, because it's using just the declarative memories. So we've seen a lot of vets in our work heal themselves from post-traumatic stress disorder, and a lot of energy psychology and EFT and EMDR, the energy psychology techniques, are addressing that implicit memory system in the body as well as the brain. And if you look at a functional scan of someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, it's called the ring of fire on a SPECT scan. The whole entire brain is lit up, and that person is literally way out of balance. So in that state, what they're doing is they're constantly scanning the environment in anticipation of anything that's going to come close to that past experience. Now, when you get it right, you say, you know, you guys need to hang out with me because I'm so smart. But what happens when it doesn't happen? That's called anxiety, it's called neurosis, it's called insomnia, it's called OCD, because the brain starts over-focusing. And that over-focused state tends to narrow our mind into a single object. And that's what we do when we're in emergency mode. How have we been trained to pay attention? Tie your shoe, watch the stairs, watch the car. And it's that abrupt release of adrenaline. We think that that's focus. So then when you tend to open your focus, and instead of focusing on matter and objects and things, focus on space and energy and nothing, and open your focus beyond your body and space. We've seen this thousands of times. All of a sudden, the brain starts relaxing and getting more coherent. And all of a sudden, different compartments tend to settle down. So then the person then who's scanning their environment, anticipating that event to occur, if an event even is remotely close to that experience, in anticipation of it, their perception already is releasing the chemistry as if it's in the event, and they'll return back to that same person at the time of the trauma. Does that make sense? So then, what's happening in the brain, what's happening in the field? Well, there's a complete disorderliness that's taking place consciously, in consciousness, in energy, in neurocircuitry, in neurochemistry, in hormones, in genetic expression. The person is way out of balance. And so then the process then is to start creating order and having them get beyond those emotional states. And I always say, forget the event. Forget it. Just work on the emotion. And we have seen this in so many people that have healed themselves of cancer and all kinds of conditions and rare genetic disorders. They got beyond the emotion, and when they got beyond the emotion, the body was finally liberated. And all of a sudden, they're perceiving a whole new landscape that they could never see because they're no longer looking at their future through the lens of the past.
Well, that's right. You want to say something?
The feel part, how, when you talk about it goes into the body, how does it get to the field?
Well, the field is where the information is stored, but the body is where it's processed, it's where it's interpreted. So the antenna. And it's just like Joe said, this is what's so interesting. When something hurts us, okay, so now you have a memory of a hurt. That's a neural connection, a series of neural connections. So what do people typically do? They replay that again and again. And how could they do that to me? And how could somebody betray me like that? And how could, every time you do that, you're strengthening those neural connections. And the techniques that Joe's offering in his programs and some of the ones that we're working with, I've seen indigenous people do this in their own way because they have the same problems. They just don't call it science. But they have to find a way. You shift the focus so that you stop reinforcing that memory so that those neural connections weaken and eventually they'll begin to break. It's called the pruning. That's the pruning of those connections. And you strengthen and reinforce other connections. So you don't change what happens, but you change how you respond to what's happened.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add something that's real interesting, and Joe brought up, and so did my dear brother. How are you? I wanted to bring it up because Joe talked about it. And when he showed you the EEG pictures and you saw all the vibrations at all the different frequencies, think about it this way also. Every input, sight, smell, sound, taste, temperature, is always being recorded right now. If something threatens you, really threatens you, the brain will take a picture at that moment of all the inputs that just came in at the same time. The significance is now what it's going to do is use that as a reference. If any combination of those inputs show up, pattern recognition, it doesn't have to have all of them, just a couple of them. A smell can all of a sudden engage the whole response again. So the critical moment, at that critical moment, there's like a photograph of every input at that moment, and then the system says if any of those come back in, and especially the more in combination, the more the system is ready to react at that moment. So I just wanted to bring it up because most of us had some kind of experience, a sound, a smell, or a taste, all of a sudden brings back something. And I say, why did it bring it back? Because a memory was so critical at that moment that just one of those inputs can elicit it. It's like a person who works in a shop cuts his finger on the saw. And of course, that's powerful trauma at that moment. What's the point? If he's just walking down the street and all of a sudden there's a sound of a saw, he'll immediately, just pull his hand like this. Why? Because the reflex says the saw, the pain, pull it back. So you're scanning, once you have that stress, you are scanning for any combination of frequencies in that environment that will replicate that same condition again. And it's really critical because it's always on scan.
And just to add one other thing, because we didn't answer the one part about gamma. And so that associative memory that Bruce is talking about actually is what creates conditioning. And conditioning is all built on the past. And so as you start to condition the body emotionally, you're conditioning the body into the past. So now you could only perceive equal to how your brain is wired and how you're really emotionally experiencing. So you will sweep the environment all the time. And anything that's even the slightest association is going to begin to create the exact chemistry that brings you back to that past event. Does that make sense? So then behaviors follow and everything else. So in PTSD, I would say then the person really becomes disconnected from the field. I would say that they have certain areas of their brain that shut down that don't allow them to access information because by very nature of the trauma, those dormant areas of the brain is no longer functioning like a superconductor. It's no longer an antenna that's picking up, sending, and receiving information. So then as people tend to open their focus and they understand that there's a field around them, it's the process of opening their focus that begins to allow them to connect to the field and start downloading data. And I'll give you a simple example. We had a woman that came to our event in February. It's a terrible story. She was raped by 4 men when she was 19 years old. And for her entire life, she couldn't have a roommate. She never had a partner. She had night terrors. She couldn't sleep. She had terrible insomnia. She tried hypnosis. She tried acupuncture. She tried psychotherapy. She tried everything to try to heal it. And for 50 years, she went through this. And we had a particular meditation where I was asking them to become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time, to become pure consciousness and unfold as an awareness into this infinite space, this infinite field where all possibilities exist. And she wasn't going to be her identity, she wasn't going to be her memories, or she was just going to be a thought and possibility, tuning in to information. We had her brain hooked up to the scan, and in the middle of the meditation, she got a lightning bolt of energy coming right into her nervous system, and with that energy was the message, I sent 4 angels disguised as rapists into your world to heal you. And the moment she got that information, it was over. Over from that moment forward. So that's tuning into information, and the inner experience is so profound that it really begins to erase the past experience, and it's not an insight, it's an epiphany because it makes it all the way into the body. And that's when people begin to heal, because now they're tapping in. You saw those downloads. They're tapping into data. Now, gamma is superconsciousness. And when the sympathetic nervous system, which is normally used for ejaculation or orgasm, or it's used for fight or flight, when that sympathetic nervous system actually starts to work very well with the parasympathetic nervous system, when they start lining up, what happens is instead of energy being released out during an orgasm or energy being consumed during digestion or being chased by an animal, or turning on the fight or flight response, instead of that energy being released out, it's released up. And when it's released up, the energy is ejaculated up into the brain. And when that occurs, there's a gate at the brainstem called the thalamic gate. And that gate basically opens up. And once that gate opens up, all of a sudden that energy moves right up through that thalamic gate, right through that reticular activating system, and activates the higher centers, and the brain goes into gamma state. In gamma, what typically happens is a person has an experience that they won't forget, that it's so profound, the brain is so ignited with energy that they can't forget that moment. And I showed one slide of the Kundalini. That brain was in gamma at that time because that energy was being released. And if that emotion is stored in the body, then the body literally is in the past. And once that emotion starts unraveling into pure energy, all of a sudden now, that pure energy is going back from whence it came as a thought. And all of a sudden, the brain, there's an orgasm that takes place in the brain. There's no other way that I can describe it. And that release of energy into the brain is energy making it back. And all of a sudden, the brain goes into gamma states.
Just an interesting aspect about the gamma. A friend of mine in England is working with EEG and some belief change modalities that I work with. And what was really interesting, there's a posture called Cook's hookup, and that's where you cross your legs and you cross your hands or arms like this, and you sit there for a few minutes, and all of a sudden you'll start feeling very calm. And on the EEG, you can see once they get into that, then it takes about a minute or two, and all of the energy starts to slow down and become more quiet. But the interesting part was this. He would then, after they were into this state, he would say to the person, now come from your heart in love. Just bring love and come from your heart in love. 70 seconds. It turns out almost exactly every time. 70 seconds after their directive to start to come from their heart, gamma appears out of nowhere and shoots up way above all the other energies at that point. And it's a real exciting moment because it said, once you're coming from that love in that moment of relax where everything was calm, gamma shoots right out of your head like that. So, and that's the important energy that Joe was talking about.
And it's just like, I don't know, this is a mature audience, it's just like making love. You got to get in the mood first. And you got to calm down. You got to get, we're a mature audience, you got to relax. And then you get excited, and that's exactly how it works. And so when you open the heart, that energy is moving right up towards the brain because the efferent fibers are going to open up those centers.
Do you need a break or?
The stand up, that move.
Well, okay, part of it is standing down. But the idea is this. The reason why it works is that in our normal day-to-day life, that we are operating from either the left brain or the right brain in a wave. Sometimes during the day, the left brain, sometimes during the day in the right brain. One more emotional, one more intellectual. So sometimes during the day, you're more emotional about everything, and sometimes later in the same day, you're more intellectual. The significance is you're not working in brain synchrony. You're working in dominance. One is dominant over the other. The significance is that when children are young and they're able to download massive amounts of data in that first 7 years where they're being programmed, brains are in sync, the hemispheres. When you operate with your right hand, you're using your left hemisphere. When you're operating the left hand, you're using the right hemisphere. Except if my left hand crosses the midline, now it was being controlled by the right, but once the moment it crosses the left, the midline, it gets picked up by the left. So if you take both your arms and cross them, and both your legs and cross them, you could just, to make it easy, just go like this, like that. And you sit there for about 2 minutes. If you are in a stress situation, if you're in an anxiety situation, an exam situation in a classroom, all you need to do is do this for about 2 minutes. And on the EEG that you could see, all the calming starts to come right down at that point. And that's because you're integrating synchrony between the two hemispheres. And when you're in that synchronous state and come from your heart, gamma pops right out of all the energy in the brain at that moment.
The gamma technique.
Children do that a lot. Children do that with their hands like this, too. Hi, Diane from New York, and it's an honor to be here. My question. My question is, what role do telomeres play in the body, and can we heal them? Did you hear that?
So what role do telomeres play in the
telomeres.
body? And number one, number two, can you heal?
Can we heal them? Oh, he likes that question.
Can I be
It's a cell biology question. I get an opportunity. I'll just explain what telomeres are. When you're copying the DNA double helix unfolds and a protein will march down the DNA. And in the trail of the protein, a new copy of the DNA is being made. So think of a railroad tracks, think of a locomotive on the track. And as the locomotive is moving down the track, behind it, it is duplicating the DNA, okay? The problem is this: when the train gets to the end of the track, the locomotive is still sitting on the track. It cannot copy the piece that it's sitting on. It can copy where it went over. So that means I copy all the way up till near the end, and all of a sudden, the locomotive, it can't go any farther. It's stopped on the end of the track. Guess what? It cannot copy this. So what's the result? The copy is shorter than the original one. The next time I copy it, it's going to be shorter than the previous one. Every time you copy the DNA, you lose a piece. So nature extends not a gene, but DNA, which is the telomere, as the extra track, so that every time you divide, you shorten the telomere. What's the point? Aging. Because if you reproduce it too many times, you're going to run out of telomere, and the next time you copy it, you're going to cut off part of the gene. And that's where aging and disease really starts to manifest. Originally, they said, oh my goodness, this is how long you can live. How long can you live? Is how many times can you divide before the telomere is gone? They calculated, Leonard Hayflick calculated, I think, 60 cell divisions. 40 to 60. And so the relevance about that was, then your life is going to be limited, because how many times are your stem cells going to divide, and then they can't do it anymore? Aging, right? That's what they thought. And then it was discovered there's an enzyme called telomerase. Telomerase extends the telomeres. And then you say, well, what is connected to that enzyme? You ready? The enzyme is activated in the presence of gratitude, self-love. It's extended in service. Okay? And really, it's just learning to live in harmony. So basically, if you are living in harmony, you're living in love, and you have a mission on this state, in this world, you're in service, you will keep extending the telomeres, and you will stay healthier and live a lot longer. And this is what happens really when a lot of people retire. What's wrong? No more service. And all of a sudden the service is like, well, if you don't have any function, then why should I extend the telomeres? And all of a sudden the life gets very short. So it's a lesson for all of us to say, if we came here with a mission to help, and we came here with a mission of love and to support the others, then we are given extra life to complete this work for the community. And that's what we need.
So this is one of those places, all three of our work touches upon this, and we do multi-day programs individually, and so today we get to, all three of us together, to chime in on these things. This is a relatively new body of research. You know, it was 2009. Stanford University researcher Elizabeth Blackburn received the Nobel Prize. She found the enzyme telomerase, we hear it both ways, to heal the telomeres. But here's the thing, and I want to be really clear about this. It's so hot. You know, when something new is discovered, everybody jumps on it commercially, and they try to do all kinds of things with it. And you're being bombarded. If you're on the internet, you're being bombarded with ads for health supplements and things like that claim, and what they say is they will heal your telomeres. Well, maybe they do, but here's the deal. I'm just going to back up a little bit. the way, and I'm going to describe this just a little bit differently. If any of you, nobody wears tie shoes anymore, but if you have shoes with tie lace, not Thailand, but if you've got shoes, if you have shoes with tie shoelaces, so you know the little plastic caps on the end of the shoelace that keeps them from fraying, you all know? Yeah, that's what the telomeres do on the end of the DNA. When the cells divide, every time the cell divides, a little bit of the telomere is brittle, it breaks off, but that's okay because you got some left, and then it happens again, and you still got some left, it happens again, you got some left. The Hayflick limit is 20 to 40 cell divisions, which is about 120 years. And so the idea is, now scientists are saying, well, if we can just activate that telomerase to heal the telomeres, people can live forever. Well, here's the problem with that. The way that the telomeres are designed, it's nature's way of eliminating some cells in your body that you do not want to live forever. Okay, if you have cells in your body that are, for whatever reason, not replicating properly, that's a cancer cell, or that's some kind of a disease, and the telomeres will keep those. Yeah, well, the telomeres will keep those from living forever. But if you start bombarding your body with a chemical that artificially keeps every cell in your body alive forever, artificially, chemically, it may not have the result that you want. And that's the beauty of what my brother Bruce and Joe are saying here, is that it is, what they've found is that it is through this relationship between the heart and the brain, but through compassion, forgiveness, care, gratitude, appreciation, that establishes the heart-brain coherence, and it permeates throughout the body. That is triggering the telomerase that heals the telomeres. But can see what's happening. The only way you get the benefit is by becoming the appreciation, or the gratitude, or the compassion, or the love. Does that distinction make sense? The difference between taking a pill that's going to force every cell, and then you go ahead and live and think and do whatever it is you want to do, or becoming in your life the gratitude, the appreciation, the care, and the compassion, and reaping the benefit of your body reflecting that chemically through extended life and longevity. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So I'm not saying one's right, wrong, good, or bad. I'm just saying it's so new. People are approaching this in very different ways. Here's the thing. They used to think that Hayflick limit was 120 years. There is a cell line that was created in 1958, I think is what it was. It was the woman, HeLa cells. We now have what are called immortal cells. There's an immortal cell line that biologists use from a woman in 1958. They're still alive, and they're still reproducing because they triggered the telomerase in her body to do that. So there's a lot of new research around it. I just want to an awareness. If you go home and you see a product on the internet that said this is going to heal your telomeres, you're going to live forever, and you don't have to change anything else in your life, that's a caution. It's a red flag.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything? Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'd like to just add to that, too. And it's not just about the telomerase. It's also about epigenetics.
Sure.
Because then there are these pharmaceutical companies say, well, if you take this supplement, you can, affect your epigenetics. This is a bunch of BS. That means belief system. It's belief system. and let me tell you why it's completely false, and it's why the pharmaceutical company is so lethal, why 300,000 people die every year from pharmaceutical drugs, is this reason. Nothing in the body is given to the entire body at once. The body gives information and significant whatever nutrients or hormones or whatever it is that you want to control. It directs it directly to the cells that are needed and does not put it systemically into the body. Nothing is systemic in this regard. So, for example, why did estrogen replacement therapy get stopped? And the answer is, because the whole idea is, well, if I put this estrogen supplement in your system, it's going to affect your reproductive system and your moods and all that. It's going to be great. And the fact is this. The estrogen receptors are used in many different ways besides the reproductive system. It's used in the vascular system of the heart, and also in regulating blood flow in the brain. It has nothing to do with the reproductive system at all. It's just another use for estrogen in another local place. The relevance is if you put systemic estrogen in and you say, I want it to affect the reproductive system, the fact is, yeah, but it's also going to the heart, and it's also going to the brain, where estrogen has a completely different function. That's why men have estrogen as well. It's not just the reproductive system. So the pharmaceutical company always irritates me with the idea if you find something new like epigenetics or new telomerase, immediately says, oh, we'll find a chemical and put it in there. I said, well, what happened when you put the estrogen in? Well, the intention was to go to the reproductive tract and help through menopause. And I go, yeah, but what else happened? Well, it went to the heart and it went to the brain. It affected the blood vessels, and guess what? It causes stroke and heart attacks. And that's why they stopped the hormone replacement therapy. But the message is this: there is nothing that you put into the body and it's universally distributed as the body does not distribute universally. It is very precise and very specific. So there's no general, I just take a chemical and all of a sudden I'm better. That's actually where I use the term loosely, side effects.
They call them side effects.
I want to give you a very simple truth. It is not side effects. Those are direct effects. There are no side effects.
So last thing is, if you're interested in some of the studies, check out Dean Ornish's work, where he took a group of men with a prostatic propensity and taught them how to emote, taught them how to move their bodies differently, how to make different choices, how to find the present moment. And in a very short amount of time, not only did they upregulate genes for health and downregulate the genes for prostatic cancer, but in addition, he noticed that the telomeres actually lengthened in the cells by about 10%. That means they got 10% of their life back. And one guy was up to 25%, which means now he got a little bit more of a sentence, a longer life. And Greg and I have talked about this, and I think Bruce and I talked about it once too this last year. We want to measure telomeres in our workshops. I want to measure them because I want to see if people can actually change their lifespan. I want to see if they can actually change it by doing exactly what we're doing. And if we can, it's like the 4-minute mile. It will just become the present belief.
Yes, hello. This is a vibrational or frequency question, and I'd like to see if it could be added more collectively, but it's mainly for you, Greg. I know approximately 20 years ago in the 90s, there was a consistent measurement of the Earth's either frequency or vibration. Now it's more than double. I'm curious if they looked at how there may be a pattern in the changing of the Earth's vibration with discoveries of internet, or even again, as if the Earth is moving into a alpha, Earth is moving towards gamma. And the effect that has, because I know we've been seeing it, I heard it's possibly 16% or whatever. I'm not sure how I'm not a scientist, but I'd love to hear you speak on that, and I'd like to know if there's any biological or other possible correlations that relate to this vibrational increase. And the sun and the heliosphere, do they interact with this?
So that's 3 questions right there.
Well, is it Earth? Is it only Earth, or is it again heliosphere? Because the sun and the Earth are linked. So
man, that's 4 questions.
Okay.
Okay, I understand. What's your name?
Anirudh.
Thank you. So the question, I'll just begin. The field that you're referring to, in 1958, the first satellites were launched in the orbit around the Earth to see what's happening on our planet. We didn't know. We were guessing, but we didn't really know. And one of the things that was discovered was that there is it's called the Schumann cavity resonance, is the technical term, that envelops the Earth, and immediately it was kind of hush-hush because the military began using it for communications. So you don't see a lot in the open literature. See more now, not as much as you did, or more now than we did back in the 90s. So this is Schumann cavity resonance is what it's called, and it's not a single frequency. The base frequency is 7.8 hertz, 7.8 cycles per second, and then it goes in intervals that are integer multiples. So the next one is about 15 cycles per second, And what happens is Earth goes through periods of time where one or another of these is dominant. So right now, the 15 cycles per second seems to be a little bit more dominant, but it hasn't been replaced. It's just that they ebb and they flow. And where this gets really interesting is the magnetic fields of the Earth are a big part of this. This is what they're measuring. And human emotion, specifically heart-based emotions, directly affect the Schumann cavity resonance. So what this is saying, we've all heard that the brain is the master organ in the body, and when I was in school, I was taught that the brain was the only electrical and magnetic field in the body. We know that's not true. The heart has an electrical and a magnetic field that's actually stronger than the brain. They work together. They work together. So that is a little background, and the reason this is important, 9/11 taught scientists how deeply this relationship between humans and our planet actually goes. This magnetic field, this Schumann resonance, the magnetic field, it's so important. Scientists measure it every 30 minutes. Our satellites send the data back because it affects everything is linked to this field. Every blade of grass, every hamster, every goldfish, every CEO of every corporation, every leader of every nation. There is no them and us. There's a we when it comes to this field. So they want to know what's happening with the field. One day, the satellites showed this big spike. I mean, it was like off the charts. I wish I had the slide. I'd show it to you here. Off the charts, and scientists said, you know, what on earth? What on earth is happening on Earth to create this spike? And they laid it on the calendar, and it was 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, September 11th, 2001, 15 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. They feel that it took about 15 minutes for the media to carry the images around the world through television and through the satellites. And now what they attribute that spike to, this is why I'm sharing this, is hundreds of millions or possibly billions of people simultaneously seeing these images were having a heart-based experience, the strongest magnetic field in the body. And it was the combined experience of hundreds of millions of human hearts that elevated, that spiked the magnetic field of the Earth. Now, this is news to scientists because they've always told us that we're separate from the Earth, that we don't have any effect. Humans aren't supposed to be able to affect the magnetic field of a planet. Okay, here's why it's important. If you remember, at least the first couple of days after 9/11, we were truly a global family. People came together in a way that they had never come together in modern times. Scientists attribute that to a high magnetic field. The higher the field, the less aggressive we are. This is the relationship. The stronger the magnetic field of the Earth, the less aggressive we are, the more willing we are to cooperate. So the question is, can we create that without having a tragedy like 9/11 to do it? The answer is yes. The Institute of Heart Math is now created something called the Global Coherence Initiative, GCI, where they have established sensors on the surface of the Earth and are teaching people how to create heart-brain coherence to mitigate the effects of what's happening in our world and in the field today. And the results, Princeton University was a pioneer in working with this. IONS is a part of this now, Institute of Noetic Sciences, I talked about yesterday, Heart Math. So there is a direct relationship between human emotion and these fields in the Earth when we, in our lives, so I'm going to bring it right down to our everyday lives, when we can embody appreciation, gratitude, care, compassion in our lives, when we establish this heart-brain relationship, we are feeding the very field that connects all of us in a positive way. You're feeding it right now. The question is, do you know what you're feeding it? So this is now an opportunity to consciously influence these fields. So I'm all about context. Here we are at the end of a big cycle, the beginning of another one, when there's this push for war that never has to happen, when science is telling us more about ourselves and that we're not what we believed and we're more than we've ever sensed in the past. And just when we need it the most, we're coming full circle and realizing that we as individuals, collectively as a community, have the ability to influence the fields of the Earth that bring peace to our planet. Isn't that beautiful? Well, I can't think of a better way to do it. So long answer to a short question, but those fields, it's not that the fields are disappearing, it's that they they become more dominant at times. And right now, the 16 hertz is a dominant field, and we're contributing to that. 7.8 hertz is still there.
Question, anybody? Oh.
We're all sitting down. So I have a question that my anatomy and physiology professor was unable to answer for me about the nervous system.
Can you speak a little closer?
Sure. So we went pretty in depth on, the pathophysiology of how a signal is sent down the membrane of the neuron with the electrochemical gradient and all that. But what he wasn't really able to give me a clear explanation for is how does the neuron know, how does neuron A know whether to send the signal to neuron B or neuron C? So, for instance, how do the neurons decide to send the signal to flex my arm to the right nerves instead of, messing up and sending it to extend my arm? Or, if I have that coworker I don't like and trying to become more compassionate for him, how do the nerves know how am I making them send it to the right place I want it to go? What are the mechanics of that?
Well, one of the things I'd like to just add to the story, which is not part of the regular story, is this. Well, we look at the connection of neurons at synapses and say, yes, this is a chemical connection across this thing and all that. What they're totally ignoring is the fact that all neurons are also vibrating at frequencies that are also going out in the field. So there's like a generator of vibrational frequency, and this is the most important part of neuroscience that they don't get yet, and that is this. Cells respond to vibrational frequencies. So a neuron can fire, and with a precise frequency, only a cell that has resonant receptors will fire with that, so that it's dependent on the frequency of the firing. A big mistake is that they always look at the spike as the message. That's the carrier. They erased the message. The message was there were little fuzzy lines on that neurospike that goes up and down. And I remember walking in a lab of a friend of mine who was top neuroscientist, and he had his whiteout, and he was working on a recording from his oscilloscope, and he was saying, "I'm cleaning up the line." So he's whiting out all the tiny little lines that are going up. And I said, "Well, what are the little lines going up?" And he says, "Well, those are channels opening and closing." And I looked at him, I thought, Jesus, that's the language. You erased all the communication. And so they are looking at spikes as being the information. It's not the spike. It was the vibration as the carrier wave along with the spike. And the vibration is broadcast, which is really wonderful because of this. Nerves can connect, not because they just have synapses. Nerves can connect if you just broadcast a frequency in a mix of 100 billion neurons. Only those that respond in harmonic resonance will respond. So this is why when some action happens, there's brain synchrony. All of a sudden you see the brain is firing. It's like, yeah, what's it doing? It's sending a field through 100 billion neurons to see which neurons in that field are in harmony with that. And that's the ones that are going to be activated. So when you restrict yourself to communication as a synapse, and a communication as a spike, you've lost the message, and you've lost the ability to understand how can 100 billion neurons be integrated without being wired together as well. Wiring together is good, habit, pattern, really good, but there's a lot of communication that's not wired at all.
That's the antenna.
That's the antennas, the receptors are responding. And this is so far beyond the conventional neuroscience because they're still locked into chemical, physical, communication, and the spike being the message. When I say no, spike is that something was sent, but you just erased what the message was. Yeah.
So you can look at it one of two ways, just to add to what Bruce said. If you're a materialist, then you'll see certain neural connections taking place that are learned. You crawl, then you walk, and then you grab a fork, and then you miss your mouth a few times, then you figure it out, and then you grab a glass and you pour it upside down, and you go through this whole learning process where you're really pretty much navigating in an environment. And so when we use our senses, for the most part, to interact in 3 dimensions in reality, we have learned behaviors and learned pathways that are really a reflection of behaviors and actions and choices, etc. But if you look at it from an immaterial standpoint, when you look at it that we are vibrational beings, that all of a sudden now the nervous system acts as a conductor of information, and it's the harmonics or the information that's being downloaded into the nervous system that's carrying the frequency of the message to the cell, and it's that frequency that's actually activating the cell. It's actually interacting by light and information. And it's that light and information that's happening faster than the speed of light that makes this look so natural and so fluid, because that invisible field of energy that's surrounding your body is really you. And you are really much consciousness with an energy that's animating that body like a puppet. And so then as you begin to tune into information and get beyond your senses, this is where it gets exciting. Because now you're interacting with the quantum field where all possibilities exist. And all of a sudden, you will tune into information. You saw the downloads. We've seen this time and over again. That downloading of data is actually reorganizing neurocircuitry to be more sensitive to energy, more sensitive to information. And when a person has a full-on sensory experience without their senses, imagine that. What would happen right now if your senses were heightened by 25%? Everything you were seeing, everything you were smelling, everything you were tasting, everything you were hearing, everything you were feeling. If your senses are heightened, so is your awareness. And if your awareness is heightened, so is your consciousness. And if your consciousness is heightened, so is your energy. So all of a sudden now, you're downloading vital information because you're no longer a materialist. And that's what's integrating and upscaling, for the most part, all of our biology, right down to the cell, right down to the DNA, all the way down. There's receptors that are so much more sensitive to electromagnetism than they are to chemistry, and it's just not a coincidence that they're there.
Can I just like that, just if I could, just to add on to what you just said, because there was a study at University of London by a physicist by the name of McClare, and he said, we know that cells respond to chemical signals, but we also now know they respond to vibrational signals. And when he did the physics of, well, which is a better form of signaling in regard to the receptivity of the cell, it turns out a vibrational signature is 100 times more efficient in communicating information than is a chemical signature. And secondly, as you just said, Joe, the speed of that connection of electrical signal versus a chemical signal, the electrical signal is infinitely fast compared to the movement of a chemical in space. And he came to the conclusion, he said, when you understand the comparison of two signaling methods, they're not even related in the sense that the energetic communication would be highly selected above the chemical communication. But the chemical communication is the interest of the pharmaceutical industry, and they have repressed the information about energy in the field because you cannot sell it in a tablet or a capsule, and they have no use for it.
This is one of the reasons I love coming to these conferences, because the questions you all are asking can only be answered by acknowledging that we're more than we've been led to believe in the past. So, yeah, so were you with me yesterday when I did my program in here? Were you in this room?
Yeah, I saw you a few years ago in Dallas as well, so that was,
okay,
that was a treat.
Well, thank you for that. And so the reason, and when I started our Q&A the way I did, talking about that the memory is not in our body, it's not in our brains, it's in the field. Did you see the slide or the little quick time movie that I did of the neuron growing the neurites very, very quickly? This is going to answer another question that came up a little earlier here in this Q&A session about the difference between mechanically doing something and doing it with feeling and emotion. I'm a guitar player, and so I relate to this as a guitar player. But you can relate it in any way. It is, and I'm going to say this again, it is the act of us, our desire, the emotional desire of choosing to become more, to expand who we are more than we were, 5 seconds ago. That is the biological imperative. That's the trigger that your body must now do what it needs to do to make that happen. And one of the places that happens is when we are developing the antenna, growing the cells. Once those networks, once those neurons have responded to us in those 72 hours, and some people do it even faster, then we are now tapped into the place in the field where it makes sense. You're playing the guitar like all those who have come before, who have tapped into that same place, or you're solving mathematic problems, or you're painting like Michelangelo, because now you are tapped into that field. but it's the emotion. This is the difference between learning mechanically. You could sit down and just learn mechanically to go through. My father and I took guitar lessons when I was 6 years old. We took classical guitar, and I didn't like it because it was so rigid, regimented. It was all about form, and my father never moved beyond that. And so when I watched him have his experience as a guitarist, it wasn't satisfying for him. It was all about sitting perfectly, never allowing this hand to touch the, you know, and everything, and then he'd put the guitar down and walk away. And when I began doing this, and I allowed myself to go a little bit further, once I could feel the emotion of tapping into that, that's where the difference is, I think, between the mechanical, rote reproduction of something and when we begin to improvise and step outside of the box. But the only way we're going to get to those understandings is by embracing what the best science of today is telling us. And it's telling us that we're not confined to these bodies, and our memories are not confined to our brains, and that our bodies are receptors for what's out there. And I think that's what this Kryon conference is all about. We're learning more about out there as well as what's in here. So I hope, does that help answer the question? You've heard from all three of us.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just have one quick question. I'm sure you can
maybe
answer briefly.
You have to ask the moderator.
Thank you. Another chance.
But just one last thing about that is that if you view your body from a quantum perspective as gravitationally organized light and information, then the memory is in the field and within you because you are in the field. So it's your biology is a downward causation of what's happening in that field. And so there's fractal patterns that are happening all the way down. So I think it's, looking at it both ways and seeing that our biology is a reflection of that, it kind of unifies those two principles.
Yeah, but what are the implications of everything we're saying? And we talked about this a little bit in some of our longer programs. It means that when the universe taps you on the shoulder with a creative impulse, whatever that is, to create a new piece of music, to start a new development program, teach young people in a different way, a new diet, I mean, art, music, new innovations of nutrition, whatever it is, you're given a gift in that moment. And if you don't choose to embrace that gift and act upon it, if you say, okay, I'm busy now, maybe I'll do it in a year, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. Because it's in the field and other people are reaching out there. They're saying the same thing. They're saying, what can I write? How can I contribute? What is it I can share in this world right now? That is their impetus for their antenna to grow, and they're reaching for the same place in the field. I'm just going to tell real quick a true story. A friend of mine, keyboard artist, amazing artist, had a piece of music. It was so beautiful. He would never let it go because he said it's not ready for the world yet. And so he would go and work in a bar and make some money for 6 months, go back in the recording studio, he'd work on it again. No, it's not ready yet. He'd go work in a bar and wait tables another 6 months. One day, he picked me up at the airport at LAX to take me to an event. We turned on the radio. His song was on the radio. He said, that's my song. I said, no, it was your song. It was your song 2 years ago when the universe gave it to you. You didn't embrace it, so somebody else, it wasn't his words, but it was his melody that someone else picked up and put their own language to. So if you don't embrace your creative impulse, this is why I'm sharing this with you. If you don't embrace your creative impulse in the moment, when you get that hit, that's the universe saying, we need what you have to give to the world right now. And if you don't embrace it, somebody else is going to. That's what I wanted to say about that.
Hi, this is for Joe, a short question. Have you considered measuring brain waves when Dr. Todd does his work, his stem cell work?
Listen, my theory is I only go where I'm invited. So if you invite me, I'll come.
Joe, you are formally invited.
Look, I love to measure. I love to see the effects. And if it adds another piece to the puzzle and we understand something greater, of course. And it may not just be quantitative EEGs. It may not be HRVs. It could be all kinds of saliva samples and blood samples and everything else to put it together. Yeah.
So Joe just gave me permission to tell you a secret that we can't tell anyone else. But you're in my living room, right? This is my living room? So I've been working with the telomeres perspective for a few years now, but it's been difficult because they've always been blood-based samples. And I'm working with a really bright, young biologist who is now has a startup company in North Carolina who has developed a saliva-based telomere sampling system, and Joe and I are hooking up to be able to use the telomere measuring in conjunction with all the things that Joe is doing in his programs, and we'll pilot those in one of our programs coming up, so watch the websites. So we'll now be able to correlate all of these things, the biology that Bruce is talking about, the epigenetic factors, the meditation, the heart-brain coherence from HeartMath, and its effect on the telomeres. And to the best of my knowledge, this has never been done before. So that's why we're excited about doing all this together.
Next.
Buongiorno.
Bonjour.
I'm here representing the children. I drove across 5 states and traveled many light years to be here with you today, to breathe your air. And I am certain I am not speaking for myself to say that you 3 and Kryon represent the new Fab 4 for our generation. You're bigger than the Beatles. What words, succinct and essential, do you have to offer to us to take back to the millions of children that we serve of this new earth? Brief, to the point, what can we take away to deliver to accelerate the evolution in these times?
Can I start? No? Okay. I think it's one of the most critical places to change the planet is to start with these kids. And the significance about that is that we talk about the fact that the first 7 years is a programmable period. The significance then goes on to say that 95% of the kid's life is coming from the program. And when teachers are trying to teach, they don't recognize that when you're teaching, you're touching conscious brain, but you're not really hitting the subconscious. And so they have so much difficulty because they're trying to relay all this conscious information, yet the kid came from a program that, and most of it is very negative programming, limiting, disempowering, self-sabotaging, and we have to start dealing with that and not try to keep adjusting the conscious mind, but to allow a better program for them to live by. Because if they keep going back into that subconscious and you start playing 95% of the time these negative programs and they don't see it, as I talked about in my lecture, then we have a disconnect. They don't understand. I mean, they don't want to be a negative child. They don't want to have a problem in their life. But the fact is, it's not coming from their conscious mind. It's coming from these programs. So the first thing is to recognize, you want to help the children, we have to get them off the ground with much better programs. And recognizing now that up to 70% or more of the programs are disempowering and limiting that they're getting. And therefore, it's invisible, and that's the hardest part between a teacher and why they have so much difficulty reaching the student, because they can reach their conscious mind in the classroom, but they're not really touching subconscious program.
So what would you say to him?
What would I would say, start listening to what's coming out of this community and start to recognize you want to deal with the issue, then stop playing at the top level and let's get deeper into this thing right now and own this reality of the subconscious and start to recognize that's where we need to work. And you can change the subconscious, and therefore we have the opportunity to recreate the civilization we have by reprogramming from the bottom up. And this is the way out of the situation we find ourselves in now.
So the most common question that our community has sent to our website is, what are you going to do for children? It's the most common question we've gotten in the last 4 years. So we've done a teen workshop last year that was super successful. And we have these 10 laws that I call of quantum stewardship or quantum parenting. And it's based on some of the principles that all 3 of us teach in different ways and in different modalities. But I do believe that children get this way faster than we do. And understanding development and understanding timing and understanding their biology, you can intervene at certain very critical points to begin to make significant changes. As an example, we have neurons called mirror neurons, and mirror neurons are empathy neurons. And when you feed your kid when they're little, you go like this. And you do that because you're opening your mouth and sticking your tongue out because you want them to model your behavior. You're not conscious that you're doing that, but they pay attention to your actions, and as they begin to observe, they begin to select and instruct the very neurological networks to prime the brain to mimic that behavior. So you can't say to a kid, don't be such an emotional basket case, you know, because they're watching what you're doing more than what you're saying, right? You look at the terrible twos, right? You know, you're in love with your kid. He's 6 months, or she's 6 months, or 8 months, or 9 months old, and all of a sudden they're standing up, and then all of a sudden at a year they got wheels, and they're just walking around, picking up, saying, I have a neuroplastic brain. I wonder how the flowers stay in this vase. Well, that's how they stay in the vase. Oh, let's see. There's Comet underneath the sink. Let's taste it and see what it's all about. And so they're interacting in the environment, and what does the parent do for a whole year? They say, no, no, no. And then they turn 2 years old, and you say, put your shoes on. No! Well, where did they get that from? So, but it's not an end, because we spend the rest of our lives to enter the kingdom of heaven. We must be like a child. So we actually have to be able to slow our brainwaves down and get into that operating system, or at least know how to enter that operating system in one pathway or another. So we have these 10 laws that we teach kids, and by the way, it helps parents too, because they understand that some of the things that they're passing on behaviorally is something that they have to change. And I always say the fastest path to enlightenment is parenthood, because you have to be the example of everything you want your children to be. So we have these 10 laws, and we're going to be doing more and more workshops to answer your question.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue. We didn't, obviously this isn't orchestrated consciously, but this is a perfect segue to do these questions. So I'm hearing two questions here. The original question was what we say to the children. And what I'm hearing are all really good things to say to the people educating the children and the caregivers, and I'm on board with that. And I spoke with you yesterday. If the Templeton grant money comes through, we're going to go much faster, but we're developing these programs now to share with young people in public schools at a very early age the new discoveries that show them that they are connected to their bodies, not separate. They're connected to the earth, not separate, that we live in a world of cooperation, not a world of conflict. And they'll begin applying that. So that is what I would say to the caregivers, but to the children themselves, and Joe, you just did this perfectly, to slow down those brain waves. And I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to our young people is to immerse them in nature again. Because we have created an environment, and whether it's in cities or a lot of it is digital, with all of the digital equipment and cell phones and texting, which can all be tremendous gifts. I think we have to regulate those in our young people's lives. And the amount of time that they spend with that, we need to give them at least that amount of time in nature where they slow their brain waves down, they feel connected. Once again, something happens. And it's hard to put your finger tangibly. I mean, I can explain it as a scientist, but to a young person, it just feels different. And that difference is something that's missing in so many of their lives. And once they get to that, then we don't need to tell them so much what to do, because the world begins to look different. Let me just give you an example. I have a good friend of mine was teaching meditation in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which also happens to be the home of the Air Force Training Academy. And it was right after 9/11, and the Air Force was developing a new special ops division, kind of like the Navy SEALs, but it was for the Air Force. And they wanted to teach the Air Force cadets how to spend long periods of time alone in isolation, without human contact, without going crazy. So they asked my friend, a woman that I knew, to come in and teach the cadets meditation. Well, it was so successful that once these cadets began to learn meditation, they could spend a lot of time by themselves, but all of a sudden their role in the military didn't make any sense to them any longer. Because The reason is because once they were in this space, they slowed down their brain waves. They're out in the field, in a foxhole or wherever they are. They're in nature. They go into meditation. They say, my God, there's something else out there. There's a whole world out here that for many of them became more real than what it was they were training for. So needless to say, the Air Force terminated the contract that my friend had of teaching meditation, at least that form of meditation. But I think getting our kids back into nature is really important. It's a long answer to a short question. Yeah.
I want to add just one thing, please. One last thing. Because it's about going back into nature, as you just talked about. 6:46 seconds. Here it goes. Very simply this. Use it or lose it applies to every cell, tissue, and organ in your body. Especially relates to creativity in the brain. And what we have done is taken creativity out of the school. And so more science, more math, no music, no art, no outside activities. And when you don't let children exercise these activities, their creative nature disappears, and now we have kids with their little, handheld playthings, only reactive. It's reactive, it's not creative. And that's because the belief that science and math is more important than creativity in our school has caused us. This country used to be one of the most creative countries on the planet a few years back. And today, we have lost that. Creativity is in other countries, not here anymore.
Last question.
I believe on some level we can also access our conscious mind or our infinite mind through being conscious as well as in a meditative state of mind. So have you done any research or anything on that as well? And I know that there's a super consciousness that we're meant to live on an ongoing basis on this planet to help nurture and feed that planet. But all I hear is about meditation, and I don't know about the...
I'll see if I can demystify this for you.
Okay.
We use meditation as a model to help people change and regulate their internal states. And if you can take your attention off your outer world, you're more prone to pay attention to how you think and how you feel and what your propensities are. The fact that you get up and you move around all day long and your body's in a habit of doing certain things over and over again, and you're sitting your body down, you're telling your body that it's no longer the mind, that you are the mind, your consciousness now controlling the body. And if you can find the sweet spot of that generous present moment, it's going to require you to become conscious of when you go unconscious. And it's that act that begins to develop our ability to be present. So then once you develop the ability to be present, where you place your attention is where you place your energy. So if you're practicing being present every single day, and I never get up from my meditation until I find that present moment, and I know when I'm there and I know when I'm not. But if you're practicing every day the art of being present, you would have to agree with me. You can do it with your eyes open, or you can do it with your eyes closed.
I do agree.
And so then it's a skill to be able to develop it. You can't go and have a great spiritual meditation or come to a workshop like this and get on the freeway and cut people off and, you can't do that, because it's like eating an organic breakfast and spending the rest of the day eating junk food. That when you start having profound inner experiences that rock your world and connect you, on some level, it turns into a mood. It turns into a temperament. It finally becomes part of your personality. And so as you're beginning to do that, you'll be able to regulate your states and know when you're there and when you're not. So then the idea is to prime the brain and body into a new state of being, and then be able to maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day, independent of the conditions in your environment, independent of the emotional addictions or habits in the body, and transcendent of time. And if you can, get ready, because something unusual is going to happen in your world. It's the law.
So, have you worked with people that have actually reached that state?
Yeah, we use, it's kind of interesting because when you saw Greg's little thing with the somatics on the little drop of water, well, we use a kaleidoscope. We've actually created a kaleidoscope to begin to induce a certain level of trance that allows the person to be able to regulate or access those states with their eyes open. And we have had amazing brainwave patterns and heart rate patterns as a result of it. And you can do it with your eyes open. As a matter of fact, Bruce mentioned this the first day. You're driving down the road in the car, and all of a sudden you go into trance. You forget about your external environment. You forget that you have a body. You forget about time. You pass the exit. Well, where were you? Because you are connected to something, and your brain is in trance. Now, sooner or later, if something moves out of balance, or all of a sudden you get a thump in the engine or something, you come back to awareness because it's breaking that state of continuity. So we do it all the time. Every single person in this room has done something great in their life. And when they did something great, they had a vision. That vision inspired them emotionally. And when they combined that clear intention with an elevated emotion, they were giving their body a sampling of the future emotionally. And then they began to get their behaviors to match their intentions. They wrote down the choices they were going to make, the things they were going to do, the experiences that they wanted, and they became aware of the choices they weren't going to make, the thoughts they weren't going to have, the behaviors they were going to stay away from, the experiences that brought them to a lower denominator, and the emotions that may have brought them back to the past. And it was that process every single day. They were going into a meditative state because they were stopping for a moment and becoming conscious in the present moment. And they reach a point all of a sudden where you know it's going to happen. And when you know it's going to happen, you relax.
So when you go into that state on an ongoing...
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
So I just want to add something to that. You know, we're using these words to define different states of being because it's convenient for us. But to our body doesn't know necessarily where one state ends, another state begins, right? And or one brain state ends, or you know when we're in what degree of awareness. Our body doesn't necessarily know that. I've spent a lot of time in Tibet over the last 15 years. I was taking people into Tibet, and I was with people who had learned in a different way. The monks and the nuns and the abbots. They were educated differently as young people to be aware of their environment and to have awakened senses. And they have these extraordinary abilities, extraordinary to the Western world, but ordinary to them. And I think what they demonstrate is what is available to everyone. And what the studies showed, when the scientists take these people into the labs, what they find is they are awake on every brain state. They're not only in alpha or delta or theta or gamma, they're awake in all of them simultaneously. And the scientists said, you can't do that. You can't be that way. Well, they are, but if you were to talk to them like this, you wouldn't know it. They are in such a heightened state of awareness on multiple levels. And the other place, Lee, I hope you're listening to this, the other place where they have found this is in channels. They found that when people are doing really good channeling and they are wired up to the brain monitors, what they find is they are active in multiple simultaneous brain states where typically in our everyday waking state we're not. So I think it's about a way of being. We're learning about a way of being, and we're coming at it from a society where we have been taught to focus in a certain way on the outer world. So the meditation is a path to help us to become aware that something else is there, but ultimately it's about something that we be, a way of being, rather than something that we do. And I think we're all moving toward that being right now. That's where we're going. I think this entire room, myself included, first of all, I just want to say you all have been such an amazing family to be with this weekend, such a sweet audience, so generous with your hearts and so willing to open to new ideas and allow us to share them with you. And I am deeply, deeply appreciative, and I think I can speak for my colleagues here, that I sense when we go out into the world, and whoever you go home to, and please thank whoever you go home to for sharing you with us for these days. But my sense is you are going to go home in a heightened state of awareness, and people will notice. They might not be able to put their finger on it. They'll say, something's different. You seem like really happy, really vibrant, really awake, really alive. You look younger. Your telomeres are bigger. What did you do?
You changed your medication.
Yeah. And my sense is when somebody asks, you come home from a conference like this, and people say, so, how was your conference? What'd you do? You know, it's hard to say one thing that you did. But my sense is if you can simply live every day in your lives, whatever this time together has meant to you, then other people get it. And that's how they get it. So thank you all. We love you all. Thank you. Very much. Yeah. Thank you.
I also would just like to close with this. I can't express the joy that I have with mi amigos here. And it's such a unique opportunity, and I really want to thank Lee and Elon. Thank you so much for not just bringing us and allowing us to share our love together, but to bring this audience in. And that makes it all work. So thank you so very much. Thank you.
And I think one of the greatest gifts you can give anybody is your attention. And when you give them your attention, you give them your energy. And thanks so much for being present with us. We're truly honored, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Of course, we're not. Thank you, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Greg Braden,